Mr. Wickham is evil. Well, I don't know much about this guy. It's really my first time reading Pride and Prejudice, but again, I am reading Pride and Prejudice for the first time after seeing the movie and the BBC version about 15 years ago. And I did like skim through it in a college class a long time ago, but I don't remember anything. So I just today want to talk about the brilliant writing of Jane Austen and how she's showing a character of Wickham and how he's really subtle in his evil ways. He does everything from virtue signaling to gaslighting to undermining and demeaning other people. And I don't really know or remember much of his backstory, but I do remember that he is pretty awful. So I just want to give a roadmap in chapter 16 when he is talking to Elizabeth for the first time and how to identify a person in the words of Jane Austen for just what an evil, nasty person like Wickham looks like. So in this whole chapter, she just gives us a masterclass. And I don't know what it's really called, but I would probably say like covert aggression. While Wickham really appears to be this perfect gentleman and he's charming and he's open and he says he's a victim, he's actually, really calculating and he's performing this character assassination of Darcy and he knows exactly what he's doing. And it's also a real wonder that Elizabeth is falling prey to this, someone who is very much prejudiced, but someone who is also supposed to have the brains in this novel and someone who's supposed to have more quickness than her sisters, which is the first chapter. It says that she has more quickness than her sisters. If Wickham could fool Elizabeth, I think a lot of people can fool and fall prey to someone like this. And I think Austen uses Wickham to show how a really skilled manipulator exploits their audience to plant lies that kind of feel like half-truths. So here is a roadmap of Wickham's behavior, and it's just an analysis of his behavior and how to recognize it in the people around you. So the first thing that is essential in this conversation is that she's let her guard down. Wickham is really charming, and the book says that Mr. Wickham was therefore at leisure to talk to Elizabeth, and she was very willing to hear him, essentially just because she has a massive crush on him. So from the start, there is an initial attraction that Lizzie feels toward Wickham, and this causes Lizzie to just be blind and listen to whatever Wickham says. Had Wickham been more ugly, like perhaps Mr. Collins, or really not that great at, maybe he wouldn't have as much animosity toward Darcy, and Elizabeth wouldn't at the same time, and so she wouldn't really want this gossip talked about that much. But I think had he been less attractive, she would not fall prey to this. So I guess the first warnings are just beware of your crushes. It's good to have crushes, and it's human, and it's really lovely, but and I will make another video about this later, but beware of emotional availability too early. Everyone talks about wanting someone who's emotionally available, but someone pouring out their emotions too early in the relationship or on a first date or something can be a big red flag. And the same is true if you are the one being too emotionally available too early. Emotional availability should come with time, when there is trust established. Not at the whims of the first encounter where you barely know anything about a person other than that they're hot. But the first thing Wickham really does in this chapter is that he has false humility. So beware of false humility. He shows just how grand he is at not insulting someone. And therefore, I think he really cements Lizzie's affections for the feelings that she has for Wickham. Wickham doesn't really start by attacking Darcy. He pretends that he's too good to attack Darcy, which is ridiculous. So he's establishing himself here as this moral authority in Lizzie's life. He claims that he's not qualified to form an opinion because he has known Darcy too long. And he says things like, I have no right to give my opinion. It is impossible for me to be impartial. Meanwhile, you can kind of smell the desire that this man has to just get into the gossip because he literally in the next paragraph begins with his character assassination of Darcy and the hot, juicy gossip and tea that he has of this guy. And so by pretending to be restrained, he actually makes his eventual accusations seem, they almost seem like they're forced out of him rather, by the truth rather than by any malice, which is crafty. It's really crafty. So I guess this step is to just beware of a person who says that they can't talk bad about someone before they literally get into talking bad about that person. I think a real man will either not say anything bad about a person or will say that to a person's face and not behind their back. This level of gossip is just insane. And I think that if he could, if he couldn't say anything bad about Darcy and then just didn't say anything bad about Darcy, he'd be great. But he cannot help himself. So beware a man with a loose tongue who has no control over how he speaks. The next thing that Wickham does here is he just manipulates Elizabeth with the truth, which sounds a bit weird, but before he can dazzle her with the lies, he just mixes a few truths about Darcy. Things that Elizabeth has seen for herself that she cannot deny. And he's using really selective honesty here. He's being honest about a few things to kind of pave the road onto what I'm guessing will be his lies. Now, again, I don't really know what the lies are from, because some of the facts I just don't remember in this book or in the series. And I don't really know the backstory behind what is going on or what he's saying, or, I don't really know what he's essentially lying about, but I do know that he is lying here to some degree. He is just mixing truth with lies. So he confirms the facts Elizabeth already knows, that Darcy is rich and that he's proud. And he does this to gain her trust before I think he starts spouting off things that I think will be lies. And he praises Darcy's father and acknowledges Darcy's liberal and generous actions toward the poor. And he even goes on a step further and explains that Darcy's good deeds are just filial pride or brotherly pride. And so he reinterprets Darcy's virtues as actual vices, that these things aren't things to be proud of. If Darcy is kind, it's only for show. And this is a subtle form of gaslighting, telling Elizabeth what it looks like that the good behavior is actually this dreadful behavior. And the ironic thing really behind this is Wickham is doing the very thing that he's warning Elizabeth of. He's saying that these things are only things because he seems to be, a good guy, but he's really a rotten guy. And I honestly think that he's saying this to get laid. I know that's almost a crude thing to say, but there was a line at the beginning of this chapter that almost makes me think that him and all the other military guys are just really excited about all the babes in the town. The line says, "It was the prospect of constant society and good society," he added, "which was my chief inducement to enter the Shire. I know it to be a most respectable, agreeable corps, and my friend Denny tempted me further by his account of their present quarters, and the very great attentions and excellent acquaintance Meryton had procured them." Now, maybe this is me just inputting my modern, brain-rotted mind on this story, but Denny just seems like a guy stationed in this town who is hooking up with tons of ladies, and so he writes a letter to Wickham saying, "Man, there's a lot of hot girls here," and he comes running. Probably isn't the case, and he's just maybe like a social grifter, but it's still, I think, really icky. So I guess here, the thing is just to have the opinion of Jane at all times. In the next chapter, Jane essentially says that there are two sides to every story. She is the real truth teller in this story. I love Jane so much. But the next thing that Wickham does is he plays the victim. Now, this is something that I am always wary of in a person. If someone who I'm talking to always paints themselves as the victim and only the victim, that's a red flag. I've had horrible things happen to me, but I hate calling myself a victim or even talking about those stories. I want them to have no power over me. So I move on and put them in the past and don't really bring them up. But Wickham uses the past to kind of paint himself as the victim. And so he creates this real sob story with Elizabeth. And Elizabeth just melts in his arms. Wickham makes himself this tragic hero whose life was ruined by this awful, terrible, oppressive villain. He uses Elizabeth's empathy as a weapon. And I think it actually turns to Lizzie not really being able to judge at all properly. He claims that he was cheated out of a living in living with the job that he was supposed to have in the church. And he says he was cheated out of a living bequeathed to him by the late Mr. Darcy. He says the church ought to have been my profession, had it pleased the gentleman we were speaking of. And so he frames his own financial, illiteracy or his financial problems as Darcy's meanness. I kind of have a feeling that this isn't really going to be the case. I don't really know what's happened with the backstory behind Wickham, but I feel like he's going to be seen to be taking advantage of old Mr. Darcy. But at this moment, he's really playing up the violin and hamming the story up to Elizabeth so that she's on his side. And he has her in the palm of his hand. So beware of someone who always plays the victim. The next point is one of my least favorite that Wickham actually does. And it's a repeat of the first one, really. He is just so demeaning to people. And he's demeaning and he is uplifting himself at the same time. He just lambasts Darcy's family while pretending it pains him to do so. And so he's just trying to make the insult feel more credible because it's wrapped up in this regret. Oh, I hate to speak badly of, them, but they're just awful. It actually seems like he relishes in this. And he even attacks a young girl who isn't even there. This is where I get really annoyed with Lizzie. Someone she's never met before, she already forms an opinion of. And so he attacks Miss Darcy, who's a young girl, by calling her proud and not amiable. He says, I wish I could call her amiable. It gives me pain to speak ill of a Darcy, but she is too much like her brother. And so I think what he's doing here is he's isolating Darcy even further by suggesting that the rot runs through the entire family. And I think he ensures Elizabeth's feelings that she's justified in her prejudice. And this one, I have to be honest, feels like the way that he's going to get caught. I think at some point Elizabeth is going to kind of meet Miss Darcy and find that she's actually pleasant and lovely. And I think that the whole story will kind of begin to unravel and come crashing down there. I guess this is kind of like, this is a read and find out moment. But this is also a funny note because I think that people who do this, or people who are like Wickham and who kind of like heap up this story, end up burying themselves by going too far in their story and their lies. They can't stop with simple insults of one person. Their story just kind of keeps getting more and more lavish and more rickety, so that one small little poke into what they're doing and what they're saying will topple the whole tower forever. It's almost like this Jenga game after you've been playing for about 10 minutes. Their story just kind of might seem strong at first, but they keep building on top of each other and almost doing things out of like a necessity to just tell a crazy story. And they end up going out a little too far just to get a person on their side, and that ends up being their undoing. So I'm guessing that this is going to kind of be his undoing. But I don't know if this will really be his undoing. But I just love Darcy already in this novel, and I am only assuming that Miss Darcy will be lovely. But I guess we'll see. I think overall Wickham is just really using an us versus them mentality here. And everyone likes to be on the good side. And so he poisons Elizabeth's already dreadful feelings and opinions of Darcy, and makes Elizabeth feel like they are sharing a secret bond. And they're doing this against a common enemy. It is just a nasty bit of behavior right here. And I've got to say, I am excited to keep reading and just seeing what happens and how this story progresses and comes crashing down for Wickham. I really don't know much about it, but I do know that it kind of comes crashing down for him, but I don't know how or really when. But all this to say, I just think Austen is really good at character writing and psychological writing. She really gets into the mind of someone, and she paints a great scene of someone who is gaslighting and virtue signaling and undermining and all those kind of trendy terms that we use today. But Austen is doing this without really knowing what those terms were called, I guess. She's doing them before we even had names for them, which is a sign of a great writer. She knows what these are based on conversations and situations that she's probably been in. It's just brilliant stuff. So just join me as I do some live reads of this book. I'm doing live reads pretty much a few times a week for this channel, and then essentially just like a book club of the classics. So subscribe if you want more of my thoughts on this book. Make sure you like the video too, and I'll see you in the next one.